Hey everybody, it's the Tominator. So let's talk about this controversial outcome at the 2018 Pittsburgh Pro, where Steve Laureus, there on the left, narrowly edged out Divine Wilson to capture the Classic Physique title. And I'm going to get into a pose-by-pose breakdown in a few minutes, but first I just want to give my take on this, because a lot of people are none too happy with this decision, including Divine Wilson himself, as you can see him during the award ceremony looking salty as hell. Now, it's true that Devine clearly had the better conditioning and stage polish. He was also on another level in terms of the back development, and we all know that shows are normally won from the back. Yet, Laureus somehow came out on top, so what gives? I mean, I can definitely see why so many people disagree with these placings. And yes, Devine's facial expression here pretty much says it all. But regardless, there's no excuse for walking off stage like how he did. I watched the video footage, and what's interesting is that nobody in the crowd really booed when Divine was announced second, but they did start booing at him when he walked off. And rightfully so, because that was an act of extremely poor sportsmanship. I know he apologized after the fact, but still, there's no excuse for that. So yeah, many of you are naturally crying foul, saying that it was pure politics, that the judges were biased towards Steve because of all his social media hype coming into the show. And to be fair, there might be a strong argument to be made there. Perhaps this was the case. I don't know myself, as I don't follow any of these guys on social media. Hell, I don't even have an Instagram or Twitter account, so I can't really speak much on that. But the burning question remains, was this a robbery? I mean, okay, sure, you could call it that. I do think that by ordinary bodybuilding standards, Divine had this in the bag. The more conditioned athlete with the better back should win the contest, especially when his opponent is comparatively soft and undefined. But that being said, this has to be the least upsetting robbery in history as far as I'm concerned. I really don't have a problem with Laureus winning here at all. Even though he was a little off and his tan was terrible, the bottom line is that he still looked fantastic. The way I see it is this would be like Kevin Levrone or Flex Wheeler defeating Ronnie Coleman back in the day. Can you imagine that? Many of us would have been ecstatic. Now, obviously, this is a very different situation. Divine Wilson is hardly Ronnie Coleman, and Steve Laureus isn't a vintage Kevin Levrone or Flex Wheeler. But the reason I draw this unlikely comparison is because in both scenarios, you'd be electing a shapelier, more aesthetic competitor over a more muscular and conditioned one. It's basically picking aesthetics and proportion over mass and conditioning. This is something that many of us, myself included to a degree, have been clamoring for literally decades now. So why are you going to complain now? Look, the whole reason they introduced Classic Physique in the first place was to make a return to the leaner, more athletic-looking physiques of the golden era, to get away from the freaky, over-the-top mass and disgusting, distended stomachs plaguing the open division. And in that regard, I think Steve Laureus represents this ideal to a T. Now, you can complain about his conditioning or his poor coloring all you want, but that doesn't take away from the fact that this dude has one of the most aesthetically pleasing physiques I have ever seen. His proportions are absolutely mind-blowing. With that impossibly small waist and big arms and sweeping quads, that crazy V-taper, he's like the second coming of Brian Buchanan, who, by my estimation, had the single best front double biceps pose of all time. So yeah, Steve's genetics are top tier, and this is the sort of look that Classic Physique should be rewarding. That's not to take anything away from Divine Wilson, because he also looked terrific, but if I had to choose whose body do I want to have between those two, there's no question it would be Steve Laureus. Though from a conventional standpoint, I get it. Divine was more polished, more conditioned, and while his legs weren't quite as good, he was much better in the back. And let's be honest, he probably did deserve to win this show, but keep in mind that this was an extremely close call. If you check the official scorecard, and I'm not sure why more people don't ever show you this because scorecards are readily available through a simple Google search, but it turns out that Laureus only beat him by a single point. As you can see at the bottom and the top there, Steve had a total of 7, whereas Divine had 8. So that's literally the smallest margin of victory possible, and their placings could have been reversed had a single judge voted differently. This may come as small consolation to Divine Wilson and his disappointed fans, but the point is that it could have easily gone either way. Here's the deal though, guys. Truth be told, I don't really understand how they're judging this new division. It appears that dry, grainy conditioning and dense muscularity aren't the be-all, end-all like they are in the open class, and they seem to award major bonus points to anybody who can pull off a vacuum. That's the only reason I can think of for someone like Courage Opara placing so high at the Arnold Classic this year, and it seems to be holding true for Steve Laureus here as well, but if that's the case, if they are rewarding vacuums, aesthetics, symmetry, and proportions over the usual mass and conditioning, I mean, that's fine, but Be consistent with it, because by that measure, Chris Bumstead should have won the Olympia, straight up. I've been trying to explain to you guys that Breon Ansley beat him because of superior back development and muscle maturity, but if that's the case, then it doesn't make sense for Divine Wilson to lose this contest. So I don't know what to tell you, man. The judges seem to be all over the place with this. To be fair, maybe it's just a different panel of judges. I have no idea if these judges were the same ones that were at the Olympia. Probably not. So maybe some judges have a certain vision for what they're looking for and others have a different vision, and that's why we're seeing some of these questionable placings. I think that what it comes down to is that they're still undecided. They're still collectively trying to figure out what direction they want to take this new division. But anyway, enough rambling. Let's finally get into this and break it down pose by pose. So in the front double biceps, this one is Steve Laureus all the way for me. His proportions are just too much for Divine. I heard some people saying that Steve looked flat, but I don't know about that. If this guy is flat, then Divine is a pancake, okay? I mean, look at his arms and legs, the roundness through the shoulders and the sweep through the lats and the thighs. Plus, the waistline's just ridiculous. I don't care if Divine is a little sharper. He's not winning this pose. One thing I do feel the need to point out is the way that Divine hits this one looks a little off to me. You see how he holds his hands like that? They look too stiff. He's not bending at the wrist enough, and it looks a little funny. I mean, it's nitpicking, because other than that, it's fine. I don't mind the tilt. It adds a bit of artistic flair and is advantageous for guys with slightly thicker waists. But anyway, onto the side chest. This one is close. You could go either way, but I would give it to Divine personally because he seems to be presenting himself just a little better. I see more chest, and his superior conditioning downstairs is really pulling him ahead. You can see the deep split between his hamstrings and his quads that Laureus simply doesn't have. And Laureus' lack of posing oil is making him look flatter than he really is. So maybe that's why some people were labeling him as being flat, because his muscles don't appear to be popping the same way as Wilson's, simply because he doesn't have that same reflective sheen to highlight them. Now, in the back double bi, this is a pose that really should have probably sealed the deal for Divine. I know I've been praising Steve Laureus and suggesting that he perhaps deserved his victory after all, but from the back, it's not even close. He's getting owned. If Laureus has one major weakness that he needs to address going forward, it is his back thickness. It looks fine when he's standing on his own, but next to someone like Divine Wilson, it appears far too shallow. And Divine's lower back is so well developed, he's showing us a Christmas tree and it's only May. And finally, the ab and thigh. This is the fourth and final mandatory pose that they make them do in classic physique. And again, I feel arguments could be made for either athlete. If we're talking about shape and structure, you can't go wrong with Laureus. His silhouette is just outstanding, man. But if we're talking about conditioning and definition, you got to give it to Divine. He's much sharper through the midsection. Personally, I would probably go with Laureus because even though his abs look a little faded, his thighs are clearly superior, and same with his overall lines. So yeah, that's 2 poses to Steve, 2 to Divine, in my estimation. Now, Divine did smoke him from the back, so with regular bodybuilding, that would usually mean he's going to come out on top. But if the judges are indeed placing more emphasis on aesthetics and shape and proportions, then I can see why Steve would end up taking this one. So once again, yes, you could label this as a robbery if you're viewing it from the ordinary bodybuilding lens where mass and conditioning are king. From that perspective, it's clear Divine was the winner. But like I said, I think Steve Laureus still looks tremendous. I think he's getting a lot of undeserved flack for this victory because despite not being at his best, he still embodies the classic physique ideal almost perfectly. So I don't have a problem with this sort of look being rewarded in this division whatsoever. So that's my take on the 2018 Pittsburgh Pro Championships. Let me know yours in the comments below, and thank you all for watching. Until next time, I'm the Tominator signing off, and I'll be back.